Greetings, everyone, and welcome to a Fireside Chat with Zany Mystic. I am your host, Lance White. Tonight, my guest is Clif. Clif is best known for his work with the WebBot project at halfpasthuman.com. So, let's welcome Clif to the show now. Hi, Clif. How are you?
I'm doing just fine.
Oh, good. Well, I ordered and read your report, your latest report. It's called The Shape of Things to Come. And it is worth it's not an expensive report to purchase, and I think everybody ought to invest in it. It's quite an interesting read.
They have a tendency to be very text dense, but contain some interesting insights, yes.
Yes, very interesting insights. Now, did I get that more or less accurate that you began by trying to analyze the market trends in order to play the stock market or to invest?
Yeah, pretty much. I was employed as a software engineer and basically a software troubleshooter on large projects for some consulting companies that were dealing with SQL Server and a few of the first 3 and 4GL object-oriented programming languages.
Okay.
All of which is kind of moot, but it suddenly dawned on me in like 96 or so that, the stock market in no way is run on logic. It's all emotional. It was like, well, after that big duh moment, it was like, oh, well, geez, if I can just figure out the emotions that are associated with the stock, maybe I can get there ahead of the crowd, and thus, I've always been told that's how people make money on the stock market, so it seemed like a good thing to do.
Right.
But I got derailed instantly. I had started off, and it was just curious, though, being in the computer business, I know all the kinds of computer companies. I needed an example company to look for their emotions around their stock, and so I chose this company called Sun, which stood for Stanford University Network. Oh. And it was one of the early networking firms, and they did some really interesting software that I liked and so on, and a lot of Unix-based stuff, and so I was tracking them. And, of course, SUN is also what we call the big scary fireball in the sky. And I started picking up far more information about the actual giant energy source for our solar system than I was for the computer company, and so I quickly got distracted and forgot all about the stock market part. Although, to my credit, I did wise up and retool all of that and use it in early 2000 to get out like two or 3 weeks before the big crash. I think we sold our few 4 or 5 shares of Microsoft stock at like 2 weeks before they actually peaked. So,
Wow. Well, good. So then you went on to begin to tweak and perfect this and expand your database to see what kinds of information might be coming. Might be gleaned from the internet. Is that accurate?
That's correct. And we don't do it off of conscious discussions, and we don't do things like emails. We use as our data source, what we do is just going out and basically read forums and other areas where people congregate and leave bits and pieces of information about common everyday subjects. Uh-huh. And then we aggregate these in terms of the number and where they're found and so on until we get these giant thick syrupy mass of words from which we extract archetypes, and then it's from the archetypes that we actually make forecasts. And basically the theory is that everybody is psychic to some degree, just like everybody has hair on their head to some degree, right?
Right.
And since we're all so variable as humans, and there's billions of us out there, and probably hundreds and hundreds of millions that are connected to the internet, then I figured since we're all psychic, some of that's got to leak out, and it's just a question of what we're picking up. And we apparently have, as I worked through the code and stuff, I got to the point where my filters were getting good about picking up what we call nonlinear associations. That is to say, not a straightforward association. And so it's like the quirky side of data mining. Sometimes in data mining projects, like for large car companies, they may say, well, we've proved definitively with our data mining that on the day that the assistant sales manager for the restaurant over there wears a yellow tie, we'll sell 2 cars. And it's like, maybe that's actually true, but it is statistically irrelevant to their business because they can't force the manager to wear the yellow tie, and it doesn't happen every single time, but it was statistically relevant enough that they got it in the data mining. And so I started picking up things like that, and we just started making future projections, and the universe started putting some actual future events behind our words, which made us all look like we knew what we were doing.
When what was the first major event that you were able to pick up? And I'm guessing that because the language isn't always direct, it doesn't speak directly about what's happening. It might speak around something, or it might use language that is obtuse or parallel. Like a ship might refer to a plane, or
correct. Because there's an archetype of transportation, and basically we do this as a drilled down kind of thing. So we would pick up the larger word group of transportation, and then as we drill down into the details, we start getting into the areas where we're actually starting to guess a little bit. Like we get an archetype that says going to be a big transportation accident. Well, then we look down at the next layer of detail, and we've got 2 or 3 or 4 areas to look at, and maybe we choose one, and it's inappropriate. And so we think there's going to be a marine accident. And instead, if we'd picked a smaller data set that was related to, say, space, for instance, we might have been accurate in stating that we were going to have, the Columbia spaceship problem. When in fact, what we actually said was there was going to be a, planetary impact from a marine disaster. Well, and of course, Columbia, gem of the ocean, all of these kinds of associations, we were just off. I just picked the wrong data set under this transportation accident that was going to cause this big emotional upset. Bear in mind that what we actually do, through a method of my own devising, I assigned a numeric value to emotional ranges and attached those to words. And so really what I do is I go through and I look through the data sources and I find emotional hotspots and hope that I find the correct emotional hotspots that go with the archetypes. The archetypes are usually correct, but the details can be a little goofy in terms of, I didn't pick the smaller subset because it didn't seem logical at the time. There wasn't that much data there, but had I done so, we would have had a very accurate description of the space shuttle, but we probably would have done an interpretation that said that it was going to be blown up over the Middle East because of all of these relationship issues that had to do with what people would call the Holy Land because of all those kind of language. And in fact, much of the debris came down in Palestine, Texas, which is also spelled as Palestine.
That's right.
See, I would have been wrong at that level again if we dropped down. Now, some of these things I go back and look at, and I think, aha, if only, if I could have only picked that one. But it helps the next time.
Yes.
So the next time we come up with something where there's 4 large sets and 1 small set with some really hot words, well, I go and I look at that small set, even if I'm, just to be sure.
Yeah. And you're learning you're probably intuitively now picking up more of the accurate, you're being led towards the accurate data now because you've been doing this for such a long time.
That's correct. For over 10 years, we've had it as a real active, continuing process. It took a couple of years to develop the software. And, literally probably 2 years of doing other work. I was sitting around coding this stuff in my spare time.
Wow.
And then I've been running it really solid since 99. And real continuously since 2003. So, yeah, you're probably correct. I'm sure that I'm actually getting better at making those guesses.
Yeah. Now, one of your biggest hits, and I'd be curious to find out how it came out linguistically, was that you picked up prior to 911 that there would be an event. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't actually think of that as our, quote, biggest hit because we were accurate only to say 65% of the linguistics, and I was off on the time. Again, that was one of those things where I'd had the time scale. Well, first off, we posted this stuff on George Ure's urbansurvival.com. I posted a little, maybe 300 words or so in a little brief paragraph form called Screwy Theory 153. Okay, and it was because this particular project was the 153rd little idea I'd written down in this book of ideas that I'd been keeping, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so I started doing this, and I wrote this up for George Ure. We posted it on his site, I think in June. It was like probably June 11th or 12th of 2001. And I stated in there that we were going to hit a tipping point. That's at the high archetype level. I knew that the planet was going to hit a tipping point, or rather humanity was, that would affect the whole planet. and things wouldn't be the same thereafter. So I was correct about that. And then within that data set that we pulled up, I had some interesting words going towards the idea of the money center of the planet being affected or attacked. And so I was correct about that because the Twin Towers were indeed the center of the North American money industry, which is also the center of the global money industry. And then that's when we started to degrade a bit. And that is to say that I had words for an accident involving the military. And it was because we did not have the word terrorism modeled. At that point, I think I was only into M. I'd started off with 300,000 words, and I in an English language lexicon, just all these words, and I was in the process of going through them, mainly all of the emotive nouns, adjectives, and adverbs, and quantifying and qualifying the emotional parameters for that word. And it just takes a long time to do that many of them. And I'd started in I think 96 on that, or 97. In any event, though, by the time that we got to 2001, because I'd basically been doing it part-time, I'd only done into the far end of the M's or maybe into the N at that point, and not T, so I didn't have the terrorism word. And then the other error I made was that the way that I'd set up the emotional parameters in terms of when they were going to impact, it was my guess in 2001, when we first posted that the tipping point event that was going to change life forever would actually occur closer to June than it would to the end of the range, because I said, well, I said 85 or 95 days this thing's going to occur, and the level of probability places it more likely within the first 15 days of this period than within the last 15 days. And basically what I'd done was I'd got my numbers reversed. If I'd reversed the scale, I would have been accurate in predicting that it would occur in the last 15 days of that period, which would have been, of course, September 11th. See, so there were errors as we were going through just because I didn't know. I was just making a stab at it and seeing where we were at. And I've adjusted some of that stuff as we've gone further. And every time we get a really good example of being accurate at one level or two levels or even three or four levels, I try and go back and see where we could have been more accurate, and that's what we call tuning the lexicon.
Mm-hmm. Well, now you said you had some even better examples of success rates.
That's true. The one that was...
I think that I'm supposed to tell people to tune into the secondary streams because the show is getting so many hits that they're having to open up another channel. So if that's correct, tune into the secondary streams because there are a lot of people listening right now.
Yeah, and apparently we can get some others on and we can cram some more people on their servers here and really suck electricity out of their their little operation there. Anyway, I'll continue here on that thought.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, the one I really liked was in terms of linguistics, where we were very, very, very accurate with the words, was the Northeast power outage that occurred a few years back because we were... I'd taken that out of what we call immediacy data, and immediacy data is data that's going to predict the future from 3 days out to about the end of a third week, so very short term. And we usually get lots of details in a very tight association to an archetype. And so we had the terrorism word. We had, now let's also stop and realize that there was no official acceptance of the idea that the power outage was caused by terrorism, but the minute it occurred in 2003 or whenever it was there, everybody instantly thought it was terrorism. And so they wrote about terrorism the day after, and in that sense, we picked up the terrorism word associated to the Northeast power outage, even though it was wrong, it was correct in that underlying sense.
Right.
And since we deal with linguistics, that's really what we get. It's as though we'll be able to look at a newspaper in which there's an article about the event as opposed to actually getting a description of the event itself. And from that view, dim view of this future newspaper, so to speak, that's where we extract the linguistics. And the Northeast power outage, I think we actually ended up with like 97% of the words that we used to describe that event were commonly